Nuts.
All right. Well, it's 11 o'clock.
It is 11 o'clock. Welcome to the Sunday brunch space here at the Voice of San Francisco. I'm Mike Egge. I'm here with Erica Sandberg, co-host, and we are here with former BART Director Debora Allen. Is she back from locking up her dogs?
She is.
Hi,
I'm here.
How are you?
I'm awesome. How are you?
I'm doing great. So I understand you started your career as a CPA at
I did.
At KPMG.
Yep.
And then sort of went back to you transitioned to Contra Costa County politics and also working at a family business as CFO. How did that sort of transition?
Well, there were a few things in the middle. I was a tax manager for a large, actually the West Coast's largest concrete company, and then was a chief financial officer for a mid-sized general contracting firm. And that was not part of the family business. Neither of those were part of the family business. And then in 2011, when the commercial construction economy was in the tank, I left my CFO role and started doing consulting, and then started dipping my toes into the local political scene, and the rest is sort of history.
And so that gave you a great deal of experience with commercial construction contracts.
Yes.
And the construction industry, which is that's part of the lifeblood of BART as well, in terms of being, an infrastructure agency that occasionally has to do these contracts and look over them. And you served on the BART board for 8 years.
Yes.
And among the things that you were able to get done was create an inspector general office for the BART board, or for the agency, that is.
Yes.
Which is something that certainly need a lot of doing, because in many ways, I think there's a lot of people who tend to think of you as the most controversial member of the board, because you are constantly bringing up these fiscal governance issues that nobody wanted to talk about.
Yeah, really, it's all about oversight. And so, there's another piece of experience before BART that is worth mentioning. I spent 6 years on the Contra Costa County Public Employees Pension Board. So I learned public employee pensions, benefits, compensation prior to going to BART. That was really my first public board gig.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a CFO in construction, I think I was with that general contractor for 12 years. And prior to that, my work at KPMG was primarily in audit and taxation of construction companies.
Wow, amazing.
So when I joined BART, I had the construction side, the pensions and public employee understanding prior to getting, plus really just the overall experience of being a business owner for most of my career, and understanding how budgets work and how you have to figure out how to balance the revenue with the expenses. So that was my entry in. But what I very quickly found in the very first year at BART was a complete lack of transparency to the public with respect to any financial reporting, and then in some cases, really actually in many cases, a lack of transparency with the board itself. So that's what I stepped into immediately.
You certainly made quite a splash at the agency. I think you sort of.
Well, I tried.
A lot of. I think there's a general assumption that large metropolitan transit systems are kind of loss leaders for regional development, and that therefore they're never going to be able to pay for themselves.
Sure.
But the reality is, sooner or later they do, and I think we sort of experienced a pretty radical example of that due to COVID, when the ridership dropped so drastically at the first part of COVID, and you had to what was that experience where you're trying to work with the rest of the board members through COVID and their attitude towards trying to get aid and versus what you thought the agency should really do?
Yeah, so COVID hit in 2020, and I actually was up for re-election in November of 2020. My first term ended in 2020, and
you were actually perhaps thinking of not running for re-election.
I was absolutely not running in January of 2020. I was done. I did not feel that my experience and knowledge and the amount of effort that I had to put forth there to make change, and really the amount of change that needed to be made there, I didn't feel it was worth my energy and time. And, frankly, at that time, I think the board was paying us about $1,800 per month for that service. And so it was, talk about loss leaders. It was a net loss for me financially for 8 years. But mostly because the time I spent on BART was time I wasn't working, right, and earning a living, right? So, but I didn't complain about that, and I'm still not complaining about that. I went there to do public service, and I did my very best at that. So in 2020, I wasn't running. And when we got into June of 2020, after a very lengthy budget battle, I wrote some opinion pieces about my thoughts that they were on the wrong track, that they needed substantial help, and that frankly their projections were later were proven to be garbage. But I was saying at the time, these projections are just nonsense. They were projecting that it would be a V-shaped recovery for COVID. And they continued that narrative all the way through 2023, when they finally had to step up and recognize that there had been a permanent shift in the transit industry, and that they were going to have to start to address that.
There's part of me looking at how BART has been run for the past 30 years, and looking at how Muni has been run for the past 30 years, and a lot of the levels you hear about, a lot of the levels of entitlement at BART that, believe it or not, were actually sort of gotten rid of at Muni, even under the Willie Brown administration. I just thought to myself, is BART actually more dysfunctional than Muni? Can it be?
I can't speak to that. I really have kept my head 100% in BART and avoided all of the distractions that the BART management tries to throw at directors to be everywhere and everything to everyone. I tried to stay focused on just BART, and
okay. Well, I'll have more obtuse questions for you, but is Susan on?
Yeah, I have a question, Debora. I think it was about 1.5 years ago where I saw you speak to a small group of people, and you made some pretty startling statements. You said that nobody else on the BART board had accounting experience, and that alarmed me because obviously this is about spending, and I remember the frustration that you were conveying about that, and you want to just address why that was so important and so distressing?
Yeah, so in 2020, as we were going through the budgeting, I actually, and I said I wasn't running. By July, I had people in my county coming to me saying, no, you've got to run. BART is in such a huge hole here. At that time, running 15% of pre-COVID ridership. And so that was, really the decision to run again was, well, I had this finance experience and I went there to use it. And now it seems like people want to listen now, right? And so I went ahead and I ran again, and only to later find that I was completely shut out by about 2022. So, with respect to the finance experience, there was no one on that board who had any significant level of experience in finance or experience in running a business. until, I think later on somebody came onto the board that had like some small business experience. And my own replacement that replaced me last year is a small business owner, insurance agent. So he gets it. But the lack of finance experience on that board, really the lack of sophistication of most of those board members, most of them came out of government positions or nonprofit positions. Now, that's not to say that a person, who's a CEO of a nonprofit doesn't have to deal with some finance issues, but I had to laugh one time. I said it in public session about the finance experience, and I quickly got a retort from Director Janice Lee, who said something to the effect of, but I was the treasurer of my chess club in college. I don't think it was a chess club, but some club that she was the treasurer of, and she touted that as her finance experience.
And we're talking, what is the budget for BART?
This year it's $1.05 billion, I believe.
Okay, so
plus,
yes, go ahead.
That's operating. So there's two budgets, okay? Mm-hmm. There's an operating budget, and that's the 1.05 billion with a B. And then there is, on top of that, a capital budget, which I believe this year is somewhere around 1.3 billion.
It's a huge amount of money. It's a huge amount of responsibility.
Yes, it is.
And without the acumen to manage it properly, you want to review what happens?
Yeah. So remember, as a board member, your primary responsibility is budget oversight, approving the budget, approving, certain spending throughout the years, and the hiring and management and or termination sometimes of 5 board appointed officers. So this was the thing that really struck me the most early on, is that the people who were leading the charge for the hiring of the top officials at the BART organization had no real experience in hiring and termination and really human resource law. They relied entirely on a legal department and on outside consultants and on recruiters to go out and do the hiring of these top people. So those 5 board appointed officers are the top chief legal counsel, the general manager, and the general manager really has 90% of the org chart. And then the controller treasurer, the Office of Independent Police Auditor, the board secretary, actually there's 6 of them now, with the inspector general being board appointed as well.
So I think there has been some talk in the past about possibly changing BART board governance. What's your take on possibly transitioning to appointed board members?
Well, that's something I've advocated for quite a while. Even when I was a board member, I was saying that these board members should not be elected. The problem, the next question that comes, and I can go into why they shouldn't be elected, but the next question that usually comes is, well, then how should we get board members? Okay, so what's the alternative? I believe BART is one of 2 or maybe 3 transit agencies across the nation that still has an elected board. Most agencies have transitioned away from that. So what's the alternative? I've put a lot of thought into this every time someone asks, and the best alternative that I could come up with was, you currently have 3 counties funding BART with the public assistance part of the BART funding, and that's San Francisco, Alameda, and Contra Costa. And so if it remains that way, and I say if because the new tax measure coming in 2026 may change that a little bit. If it remains that way, then you have 3 counties, and I believe that there should be 2 appointees from each county. We should stop doing, they spend a tremendous amount of money on every, 10 years on the census and figuring out the districts and all of that. So 2 appointees from each county, 1 appointee that either comes from the Bay Area legislators or perhaps the governor, although I don't like the governor idea. I think Bay Area and it doesn't have anything to do with who's the governor now. I think the Bay Area legislators, legislative caucus, senators and assembly members might be a good appointment body for one seat, and let the counties appoint the other 6. It doesn't need to be a 9-member board. It shouldn't be more than 7, I believe. And in the appointment process, and this is really the most critical part, this is what's missing right now, there should be minimum qualifications to sit on this board. Okay. You just can't go appointing, the advocacy director of the Bike Coalition. Okay.
Which is what has happened.
It has happened way too many times, right? These nonprofits have a tremendous amount of sway politically in electing these board members. And what you end up with are people who don't know how to hire executives of a $2.5 billion agency. They don't know what they don't know. And
they don't know, and so they take the advice of the people who helped get them elected.
Well, they mostly take the advice of the unions, and we can get to that, but the unions are what really runs BART.
Mm-hmm. I was hoping you'd say that.
Oh, I'm writing an opinion piece on this.
Yeah.
Wait,
Susan, are you there?
Before we let you go with that thought, because that's really important. What is the downside to having unions run BART? I mean, essentially, if that's the back end, the kind of gray power, what's the problem with that?
What's the problem with that? Well, essentially, you have, all components of the management, the executive management, the board management, are all intertwined with labor. Labor costs are 77% of your budget. And so at some point, I hope we dive into that, because the costs continue to go up at BART to operate the system, okay? And therefore, the deficits continue to go up because ridership's not keeping up with that cost escalation. So the problem with having a union-controlled agency is that at every turn, at every decision point, labor is protected. And I've seen that firsthand, front row seat to that, since 2020, when there were many opportunities for BART to cut costs in the system, and they didn't, because you had a labor-controlled board, a labor board majority, I should say. You had a labor-controlled executive management, and they were not going to allow anything to happen that was going to be a detriment to labor. And when I say that, you have to weigh that labor detriment to the deficit detriment and putting the system in near bankruptcy, which is where we are now.
So in the long and short of it, BART is nearing bankruptcy. I mean, I think that's
they're pretty much there in 1 year from now.
And what would happen? We go bankrupt, it goes bankrupt, and then what?
Well, so they don't have the funding to get past 1 year from now, but the plan A, and there is no plan B, okay? Plan A is that there is a tax measure on the November of 2026 ballot, but they theoretically, in current planning, run out of money in June of 2026. So they already have a short-term problem to fix before they can even get to their plan A, which is really not on solid ground in the first place, and there is no plan B.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that surprised the hell out of me, was that BART could not put together the the impetus to get, because Scott Wiener, of course, is one of the people who was trying to get a regional tax measure for transit together, several times, and was essentially being defeated by this monster that ABEG and the Metro and the MTC have become. I said, they wanted to get housing first. They wanted to get affordable housing first on there, and they could, because there just wasn't that much sympathy for regional transit. That's what it seemed like. So they're sort of at the bottom of the barrel in terms of getting in line for a regional tax measure. And I would love to hear more about how the unions have captured BART to the point where there just seems to be no governor on what they're spending, or even the recognition that even during the time of COVID, and the reality is, that they should have understood that there was some level of precarity during COVID, and they just didn't.
Yeah, and if you go back in time, during the Great Recession, the labor unions did actually make concessions during that time. And we had a ridership drop during the Great Recession,
right.
But it recovered, right, much quicker than what we're seeing now.
And you had more pragmatic union leadership back
then. I assume so. I didn't know them back then, but yeah. So let me give you a good example of the union, sort of the union control, the union narrative. Last August, and I said that there were many opportunities for labor to come to the table and make concessions. And so what would all of this do? It would have preserved more of the COVID money to last longer, right? So as it is, I'll just give you a quick statistic. In fiscal year 2024, BART's actual operating expenditures exceeded fiscal year 19 by 34%. Though they were only carrying 42% of the ridership. Okay, now there's a narrative of why that is, but let me go back to labor concessions. In April of 2020, in the heart of this is COVID, right? It's here. What do we do? BART had an opportunity. The BART board had an opportunity to use emergency labor provisions in these contracts to cut positions, to dial back labor expenses, do whatever they had. They cut service by 55% in April, okay? But they didn't cut the labor. And I heard lots of stories of, train operators are sitting at home getting paid. And that happened they didn't restore service to almost 100% for like 14 months later. Okay. So over a year. First opportunity, April 2020. December of 2020, after I was reelected in November, and they purposely waited. They were talking about it before, but they waited to make any real decisions until after my reelection or not, because they felt like there wouldn't be a narrative if I wasn't there. They were wrong, by the way. I'm not there. I'm still a narrative. But in December 2020, they had an opportunity. Actually, they were facing the expiration of the 3 non-police labor contracts in June of 2021, only 6 months later. Mm-hmm. The board elected to extend those contracts 6 months early with a 3-year extension that was a 1-year freeze, and then a formula for giving raises based on return of ridership. And they were crazy projections, like ridership had to return by 50%, and that didn't happen. In fact, it still hasn't happened today. So they put those in place in June of 2021. And by June of 2022, labor came back and said, well, this isn't working for us because now we know that these riders aren't returning. So we're going to change it again. And so in, I believe, July of 2022, the board agreed to do something like 2.5% to 3% raises. I think it was 11.5% over 3 years. They nixed the previous contract they did, and they put this new contract in place. those contracts would expire in actually this month, in June of 2025. Last August, the board granted another 3-year extension of those contracts at 4% per year raises and got nothing in return. Now, there's a narrative that I keep hearing these new board members repeat. So they're being fed a narrative that BART actually got in return for that August of 2024 extension. They got a $4 million per year savings by the labor unions, I'm using my air quotes, allowing BART to not make their regularly scheduled contributions to what's called OPEB, the Retiree Healthcare Trust. Okay. So BART stopped making those contributions, and they called it a cost savings. And still today in their presentations, they're saying it's a cost saving. It is not. It's a debt deferral that is going to cost even more by kicking the can down the road. So this is what I mean by labor governing the system. You know, if that were not the case, no director in their right mind who was really looking after the fiscal accountability and responsibility of the system, they would not have granted 4% per year raises and gotten nothing in return, with little negotiating. They say they negotiated, but I didn't see it. Okay, so what you have here, when labor's controlling the agency, basically labor is negotiating with itself. Right? There's no negotiating going on behalf of the taxpayers who fund the other 70% of the operating budget and 100% of the infrastructure budget, which I just mentioned a minute ago was $1.5 billion per year in capital projects.
Absolutely amazing. I did want to ask, Susan, are you on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Did you have any questions?
Well, I did. It's a big one. Tell me about our friend Latifah Simon and her role as a BART board member.
Mm-hmm. Well, I try to refrain from, my judgment. Every once in a while, my judgment on these people comes out in an ex post or something. But Latifah, it's a very well known fact. She came to BART with a mission with Bevan Duffy. By the way, Latifah, Bevan, and I all started, within the same week as BART board directors. I was first, by the way, so I had seniority. But Latifah and Bevan by her side came to BART with a mission of social justice, of, what I would call the things that were not the high priority of running a transit system. Right. So they were focused on a lot of social justice issues, initially making sure we didn't add police officers, but then later on sort of had to, bend on that. They came in the door with the idea of we don't need more police officers. We need to add civilian people to do things like fair inspection and crisis intervention and help the homeless people. And they were concepts of, if we just put more personnel in the system to talk to these, drug addicted people in crisis, mental crisis, drug crisis, whatever their crisis is, if we just put more personnel in the system to talk to those people, that will help them and we'll get them out of the system and everything will be great. And everyone will thank us for that. Well, that all started in 2017. That mission. And, still today they have a large number, I think 20, or maybe there's more crisis intervention specialists. There are fare inspectors. Much of the fare inspector work is met with warnings. They found that the civilian citations really are not very effective. So today, I think they have maybe 9 or 10 more police officer budgeted positions, I should say, because still many of them are vacant. They only have 10 more positions for sworn police officers than they had in 2017 when I started. And they've opened 3 new stations.
I just saw a video today that was taken last night of 2 guys smoking fentanyl on a train.
Yeah, and in fairness to the police officers, when they're called and when they're able to respond and they're able to find the person smoking on the train, and I say when they're called because I think a lot of riders have just become immune to this, and they don't even pick up the phone and send in the report to BART, or you can now text BART PD, you can call them, or you can use their BART Watch app.
And I got to jump in here because I had such a good experience doing that. There was a couple both nodding out on the train, and then one came to and started using again. Mm-hmm. I texted the number, and you'll find that number by the doors. You'll see it. If there's a problem, call this or text this. 2 stops. Cops were there, escorted them off. It was seamless.
Yeah, there's, during commute hours, a lot of people don't want trains to be held up, and they do have to hold the train, and it delays things. So I think, part of this, I mean, it's not the rider's fault that this element exists at BART. I think the new fare gates will help some. I think, but really what is needed is more police officer positions, and they need to fill them. And there's been that was, you asked me about the board members I sat with. There was a real resistance to that. They wanted to do everything they could to put people other than sworn police officers in that system.
It's so counterproductive because you have people who are true transit activists. Mm-hmm. They want the bikes and they want to do car diets and all kinds of nonsense like that. But they're really into transit. And yet, if you cannot produce a product that is attractive, works well, is just a general good product, well, people aren't going to want to use it. So it's bizarre. Like, why is one wire not connecting to the other wire in this equation?
Yes, it's fascinating topic.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing that in fact, if you go on places like Reddit, the one thing the things that you hear about BART often is that it's a wide ranging system, it's convenient to use, but you walk in and invariably there's some type of incident happening, usually involving drug use.
Yeah, and the thing, the concept that I came to BART with, and I said all along, I still say it, is the place to stop those people who are, doing things that are bothersome to the general public. And, there's a wide range of those things, from actual criminal activity to, just general uncleanliness or whatever. The way to stop the worst of that behavior, the bad behavior, is to stop them at the place where they enter the system, and that's at the fare gates.
Yeah,
exactly.
And, in the last few years, I went through this whole thing where the general manager repositioned, the general public kept saying, well, we don't see police officers on a train. That was never the answer. Okay. The answer is to control it at the gate, and to make and then have police officers available at every stop that can enter onto a train. And in order to do that, just to have at least 2, because police officers always move in pairs. The way to have at least 2 at every BART station during all shifts, or most shifts, is that you have to expand the number of police officer positions that you have. And
Right.
BART actually hired the University of North Texas back in 2018 to do a study on this. And they produced a study in September of 2018 and said to my board, you need to add 93 more police officer positions to adequately patrol the system. And that was never going to happen. They added 19. So the board decided, the majority of board members decided, and there were some people who were not with this, decided that we would add 19 police officer positions per year for the next 5 years because the budget couldn't handle adding 93. So we added 19 in, I want to say, let's see, that was in 18. We added 19 when we were doing the fiscal year 20 budget in 2019. And then they took them away in 2020 after COVID hit and took a portion of those people away and reassigned those dollars in the budget to pay for the new ambassadors that certain board members had ridden into town on. So after that, there were never any more police officer positions added, and the general manager changed in 2019, and the new general manager, the current one, continued every year during budget time when I asked, why haven't you added more police officer positions? He continued to say, well, director, we can't fill the ones we have. But the truth of the matter was they never really were, I believe, never intending to fully staff the police officer sworn positions for other reasons.
Great. So you don't want a safe BART train. Awesome. And then what do you get? You get people who say, I don't want to take BART. So well done. The other issue I just want to throw out there too, and I'm sure we've got other subjects to cover today, but is the fascinating way that, how can I put this? The BART stations themselves, if you go, it feels dirty and chaotic. Not always, not all of them, but it should be really easy to take BART, but you've got to get that card or get the, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It feels like it makes it very difficult to start off taking BART. And a lot of the people who work there don't seem terribly helpful. So it just feels like it's just not functioning in the seamless way that it should. I'm wondering if you have a comment about that.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So generally, the station agent model and really the station personnel model, I shouldn't just point out station agents. The station personnel model has not changed since BART was opened in 1972. I call it Pong era, right? We were all playing Pong on our TVs back in 1972. They have not really made much in the way of changes to that model. And so if I had support of a majority of directors, I never really, I think I might have mentioned this a few times, but I never really went after this because I knew I would be, it wouldn't pass. It wouldn't pass the unions, basically. But really, look, having a dedicated full-time station agent locked inside of a bulletproof box at the front of our stations, having to speak through a little speakerphone, and sometimes they do get up and go help people with getting tickets. But for the most part, most of the station agents are sitting in that box until somebody asks them to do something else. And so that model is just, it doesn't work today, right? And yet we have all of this safety and security concern, but those people sitting in that box are not allowed to cross that line of doing anything. Like, they're not supposed to even yell at fare evaders, right? So they just sit there and it's their job to sit there and just watch people walk through the fare gates, and they literally, their job description says they can't do a thing about it. And I know that I've talked to some great people who serve in that role as a station agent, but their job was modeled to not make them very effective. So if I could wiggle my nose and reimagine BART, that would be among the top 10 things to do, is to reimagine the entry to these stations. Getting the new fare gates is one giant step in the right direction.
And that was a bit of a struggle, wasn't it?
In the beginning it was, but it really was tied in 2017. I was talking about fare gate replacement in the broader context of fare evasion control. Okay, so fare gates are just one component of fare evasion control. It also requires police officers, and now with the new fare gates, it's stopping some of it. Mm-hmm. But what you need police officers even more than ever standing at those gates now and going after the people that are pushing the people through. Right? Because if I'm walking through a fare gate and somebody behind me pushes on me to get through with me on my fare, that's assault. Okay? And if we had police officers stationed at those gates watching this activity happen and stopping people for assaulting other people, it would stop. A lot of it would stop. Okay? Because it's going to take the police officers to step in and stop this matter. So as I was saying, in the beginning, it was a bigger fare evasion control topic. And that's where I got the resistance. And it was resistance on anything that was going to punish fare evaders or stop them. In one very early meeting, and this actually was written about by a journalist. One early meeting, I listened to Director Simon say, defend fare evasion and how we shouldn't go after them. And she said, those are just poor people trying to get where they're going. Mm-hmm. And that she was a fare evader as a young person in her life too. And that she understood being poor. Now, this is a woman who's, making $500,000 a year. Maybe not at that time, but she was approaching that. But she always, had a narrative that was standing up for the poor people who couldn't afford to pay for their fares. So that's, the pushback that I got was about that. They knew that fare evasion was a problem, but BART would never actually quantify it. And I actually had some meetings about that in mid 2019 to understand. BART finally had put out a dollar value, and they had been asked for a couple of years to put out a dollar value for the amount of money they were losing to fare evasion, unpaid fares. And they finally put out a dollar value of $10 to $25 million per year that they thought they were losing. So I actually dug into that and I said, show me your calculation. And they resisted that for a while until I finally got tough and said, I want to see this calculation, how you came up with 10 to 25 million. And so we sat down and it was a one-page spreadsheet, and they were assuming a fare evasion rate of something like 4%. Okay, so which is crazy low, and it was even at that time in 2019. It's, other systems in America did the studies and found fare evasion rates sometimes in the 9 to 15%.
Exactly. Yeah, that seems a lot more.
Yeah,
more like it.
So while I was doing all of that work behind the scenes, I had, the board majority of directors were pushing back, saying, no, we don't need more police officers. And in fact, in 2020, there was some discussion of defunding the police, and then they quickly, walked that back because they knew I was going to jump all over that.
I mean, it's not to say that when I was taking BART 5 days a week from San Francisco to Oakland, I worked near on Hagenberger in a building in the parking lot where the Oakland Coliseum is. It's not to say that, I usually came in late and stayed late because I'm not, I'm a writer. I don't like to get up early. I would get up, get on the BART maybe 10 o'clock, and sometimes be the only person on the train. And but there were a few occasions. I mean, one time a guy just started pleasuring himself. We were the only two people in the car, and my instinct, I just started to laugh, and he just kind of looked at me and looked down, and then I just got up and moved to the car closest to the train operator and told him what was going on in the back car. But that was pretty much the worst thing I encountered. Whereas more recently on BART, I've definitely seen, Stanley Roberts and I did a video series about the fentanyl dealers that ride BART with their backpacks full of fentanyl. If one of them got into a fight with another or someone else on the train and that backpack fell open, it would wipe out thousands of people. And when he talked, excuse me, I have pneumonia. When he talked to BART about it, they kind of just shrugged it off like, yeah, we're aware of it. What? You're aware of it?
Yeah, I think, well, everything I just said is true. I've always stood for more policing and more enforcement, really. And part of the problem is the enforcement part. But the other side of this conversation is that these things, that guy with that backpack, he's walking down city streets too.
Uh-huh.
And, it's not exclusive to BART.
But that's their mode of transportation to get from the Oakland places where they live, and they're in an enclosed train. Imagine going through the tube and one of those backpacks gets pierced with a knife or a bullet or whatever. I mean, it could be a disaster. It's just, and this comes back to not just BART, but the San Francisco and Oakland police. It comes back to the feds. It comes back to
the DAs,
prosecutions, the DAs. I mean, and we're not getting any of that, as we know. So, in my opinion, on a whole nother topic, but we have to start taking stuff like this a lot more seriously. Right. But I personally wouldn't be very comfortable going through the tube in a crowded BART train with several Honduran drug dealers with giant backpacks because I know what's in them.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time. I actually was very close to, the police chief, and over the years there were a couple of them, and the Police Officers Association and some of the people in police management. And, to listen to their side, it's fair when they say, well, what can we do? We can't search people as they enter the trains. We can't search them for drugs. We don't have the personnel to manage these kinds of things. And when they do actually have reasonable cause to search someone, remember, we can't forget that we can't just go, searching people. When they do have reasonable cause to search someone, they don't really feel like they have a system that backs them up. And, they'll file cases and they'll arrest people and take them into county facilities. And often, the quote that sticks in my head that I heard a couple of times was, oftentimes the person is back in the BART station before the police officer gets there after they're done doing their paperwork.
Exactly.
Oh, that's a fact.
Yeah.
So
I had a great education to both sides of this issue. I still believe BART needs more police officers, sworn police officers. And you have to be careful now. Something I noticed in the last 2 years was the narrative was getting spun as BART would put out press releases and say, we've increased police presence. Okay. Well, the ambassadors and the crisis intervention specialists and the fare inspectors, they all work underneath the BART Police Department. So when they say they've increased police presence, they've increased those non-sworn personnel. Yeah. And, BART has a terrific PIO, right? I mean, she's absolutely masterful at spinning the narratives, and this happened many times over the years.
That's perfect.
Who is their PIO these days?
Well, they don't really. I don't think the title is PIO, but it's the same thing. It's Alicia Trost.
Public Information Officer, spokesperson.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she runs the department. Yeah.
Runs the department. And
she's good. I mean, she's good at what she does. She's really good.
For better or worse.
So in your heart of hearts, what would you like to see? What do you think would be the most important single thing of single reform that could have the most impact?
Well, for the fiscal crisis, which part? Because we talked about, like the writer experience. So, by the way, when I first came into BART in 2017, all of my presentations, I do a lot of public presentations, all of my presentations, my narratives, my writing, it was all about the writer experience and how we needed to improve it. That was pre-20, right. Okay? When we got into COVID in 2020, it all changed to, we got to figure out how to make this system sustainable for the next generation, or really for the next 5 years, right? Because even in 2020, or I should say, like, go out to 2022, where BART was granted $1.6 billion of federal COVID relief money. I call it, money from taxpayers across America, bailed out BART. Mm-hmm. $1.6 billion just to the operating budget. And, it's already gone. And now BART is running on another $350 million that was granted from the state of California.
Wait, what? Yeah. It's already gone?
The COVID money is gone.
And that was how much?
$1.6 billion. That was only to fill the operating deficits. And the operating deficits are astounding. The current projection for fiscal year 2027, I believe, is something like $370 million operating deficit. Now, again, I have to keep saying that does not count the deficit in funding that they need for critical infrastructure projects, which is another $3.5 billion projected over 10 years. Oh my God. Yeah, it's a huge crisis. So do you want to know, so I view those two topics completely differently. So what's the answer to the writer experience or to fiscal crisis?
Well, let's have you answer both of them, if you would.
Okay. So the writer experience, I think, is easy. It's easier. So they have, and I think the system today in 2025 is a far better writer experience. And I'm proud to say this, having served for 8 years on this topic, is a far better writer experience today than it was 8 years ago. Okay. And far better than it was even 4 years ago. And why is that? New trains. Okay. The air conditioning works on the trains. So hopefully everybody recognized that yesterday. Oh, yeah. So new trains always gives the writer a better perception. Cleaner. It is cleaner. There's far more cleaning being done than ever before. And I think, the biggest complaint I'm hearing now with the writer experience is we're back to the delays, right? That we had that major incident a week ago, the fire on the tracks, and there've been a few of these. And so I think, if you look at the writer survey reports, that's kind of the bigger complaint on top of the safety. Is it safe? Right now, the is it safe part, we've already kind of, talked about that. Right. I believe the answer is new fare gates. I believe it is restructuring the role of the station agents into a security role, getting rid of those plexiglass booths. I believe that you can also increase public safety. There's another issue with these swing gates. The emergency swing gates lock, and the station agents have control over those locks. But if a station agent goes on break, They have to unlock it. Because
Oh.
yeah, and so there's a hurdle there that they've got to work through. And I complained about this for a couple of years, even before we got to the fare gate replacement, and I pretty much got nowhere. I got staff, shaking their head, going, "Yeah, director, we know it's a problem." Okay, but then do something about it. So that's public safety, and then and then I think generally as a Bay Area, we've got to address public safety tougher, and we've got to, get back to district attorneys that are prosecuting more of the crime. So so that's rider experience, really. It's cleanliness, safety, and the timing,
Well, they also need to prosecute the quality of life crimes, quote unquote, because that's the other thing that San Francisco and Oakland, people always ask me, how come you don't see this in other cities in the Bay Area? And I go to all the cities in the Bay Area. I can tell you you don't. And except for Oakland and San Francisco, as far as in massive amounts. And I say because it's not allowed. I mean, anywhere in Silicon Valley, they prosecute. They arrest and prosecute you. You go to jail. I mean, if they break up an encampment, the first thing they're doing is looking for warrants. And sadly, they find them. Almost everyone has them. There's a reason people hide in encampments. And they arrest them. If they have drugs on them, they arrest them. If they have weapons on, they arrest them. Mm-hmm. If they're doing drugs, they arrest them. I mean, it's just, that's just the simple fact. And I know that there's so many people that don't believe in, arresting people for peeing on a building, but they say that from Pacific Heights, and nobody's peeing on their garage like they were on mine in the Haight.
Yeah. Now, all of this. So look, if something is a crime in California, code, if it's a crime, police officers at BART should be arresting for the crime. And I saw an overall relaxation over the last few years of the actual, taking people in and prosecuting them. It's a lot of paperwork for the officers to prosecute. And then the DAs, often, the lower level crimes like fare evasion. And, there's actually a provision on the books that if you are cited by a police officer 3 times or more for fare evasion, that it becomes a misdemeanor. But nobody's prosecuting that, right? So enforcement, by BART PD is critical too. But, in my opinion, they don't have enough numbers to get it done and to, continuously enforce these rules. Even eating on the train, we saw that incident back in 2019, I think, where the guy was eating his breakfast sandwich on the platform, right?
Right.
That officer did his job. He did his job. Okay. Eating in the system is an infraction. It's not a misdemeanor. It's an infraction. It's a citation. It's like a parking ticket. Okay. You got to pay a fine. And that officer stopped that. He actually asked him nicely a couple of times to just, put it away. You can't eat in the system. And the guy got mouthy with him and wanted to take on the police officer. So the police officer detained him. The story went, international.
Amazing.
But, but look, that's what happens. So that police officer's face was on, numerous publications throughout the world. And that's what happens in today's policing. So can you blame the police officers for not wanting to stop and cite somebody for eating or drinking on the train, right?
Right. I mean, that's the least of their worries these days. I mean,
and even the drug use, that's illegal. They could actually detain someone for that, but they don't. They just sweep them off and say, get out of here, right? And that's the problem. They're in some respects, they're kind of allowing it to go on.
Maybe they need to hire stewards and stewardesses from airlines, because I could tell you, coming back from the journalism awards that Eric and I attended a couple of weeks ago in LA, there was a guy and he was, on his earbud, and the stewardess had continually said, we taking off, you can't be on your phone. She came up and he was on his earbuds, and she just took his earbud out of his ear and said, get off your phone, sir. And that was that. I mean, he put his phone away and that was that. I mean, it's, they took away my bottle of water. I was like, what? And I said, I can't even, and he's like, if you want to go back around and go through this all again and get back in line, drink your water, then you can get back. I said, okay, take my water. I mean, it's, I just think that there's a whole level of toughness that just doesn't happen in anything that enters Oakland or San Francisco.
Yeah, but Susan, there's another difference there, is that in terms of the national policies that,
of course,
at least as of now, you cannot hijack a BART train and run it in buildings filled with...
Don't give them any ideas.
Uh-oh, sorry.
Well, I think that conceptually there's a big difference between airlines and transit. Transit is really, first of all, it's publicly run as a service for the general public, and airlines are a for-profit.
Correct. Yeah, I'm joking, but I mean, it's just
But what could transit look like if it became somewhat for-profit and less?
Right.
There's give and take there. Some of the directors I sat with, at least 4 of them, often talked about free transit. Right, that was their goal. Free transit.
Right.
Right. And so, if you think about it, opposing the police department is a component of getting to free transit, because the budget for the police department is something like $100 million.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
The other side of that argument is that if you don't pay for the service you use, you're more likely to abuse it, right?
I believe that. Others don't. I think there's a big difference in opinion there.
I mean, when you look, all right, I'll just give you an example that may very, very well happen again within the next couple of weeks. Spare the air days. All of a sudden, the 38 Geary is free. And if I want to go to Ocean Beach, all of a sudden it is filled with, homeless people decide they all get on the 38 Geary and do their homeless thing and crowd up the bus because they know it's free.
Right.
It just there is a tendency to that. If you are conditioning people to invest in the system with their own resources, they're going to take more care of it.
There's, to jump in, you look at the cable car, right? There's almost never any problems on the cable car. It's $8. You get one way. It's a very limited service, and people are very, very well behaved. So there's a pretty vast difference. And
not comfortable enough to smoke crack.
No, that would be hilarious. Plus, those cable car conductors are pretty tough. So I do want to say goodbye. I do need to run.
Yeah.
It's now noon. So
thank you.
Enjoy yourself at Union Street Fair.
Thank you so very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Erica.
Well, look, at the end of the day, none of this even matters, the rider experience, if the system is not sustainable fiscally, right?
Exactly. It's 12:02, so we're sort of overdue. Did you want to? We have a couple of people who want to ask questions. Are you up for those, or?
I am, but let me just run through a list. You started to ask this question earlier. What are my solutions
for
the situation? I want to address the fiscal side, because after all, that's really where I've spent the last 5 years. So look, I've written about this. I do a lot of speaking about this, and here are my thoughts on the fiscal matters. First of all, the current narrative that is out there that if the taxpayers don't pass a 0.5 cent sales tax in 2026, that the system's going to look like a Mad Max movie where the trains are rolled over to the side of the tracks. Okay, that is not true. Okay, so first I just want to say, they've again created a narrative that is designed to get people to support more sales tax to fill these operating deficits. What would I do? First of all, the top tier of management, really, they have to go. Okay. They are not effective. They are owned by the labor unions. And we've seen where this has gotten us for 5 years, and it's time to do something different. There should be a state-appointed bailout team paid for by the state of California. Look, otherwise the state's going to have to keep bailing them out. So the legislators should just do the right thing, put up some money, hire a airline turnaround team or some other utility turnaround team of experts to come in and move the board aside and take a deep dive of what's going on there and fix it on an independent level. This is a pre-bankruptcy move for any large corporation. Okay. So then next, we talked about replacing the elected board. It's completely useless to have an elected board that sits up there. 5 of the 9 right now are brand new. They just don't even know what they don't know. And they're not effective. But the number one thing, I've mentioned this a few times, they have to renegotiate these labor contracts. These labor contracts have not been renegotiated since 2013. And the perfect time to have done that was when ridership was at 15%. They missed that opportunity. They missed 25%. They missed 35%. And now ridership's at about 47%. And they're still not going to do anything about these union contracts. They have a tremendous amount of inefficiency built into them that costs BART a lot of money in overtime. Just that alone, and other labor costs. So I won't go too far into that. But there is one provision that I think people are going to be astounded when they hear this. In the budget resolution every year, there is a provision in that resolution that the board votes and signs off on that says that the general manager has the latitude to add up to 100 more labor positions beyond what they've budgeted for. And he also has the latitude to continuously study the non-represented management positions and adjust them as needed to the 75th percentile of the average.
Oh my God.
Okay. So this is what keeps the government agency wages going up in the entire Bay Area, because every government agency uses BART as a comparator when they do their salary surveys for their negotiating. And BART keeps it going, spinning upward with a 75th percentile provision.
There you go. So let me ask you something quick about the process, the budget process within BART. Here in San Francisco, the mayor puts together the budget technically every 2 years. They submit to the Board of Supervisors. The supervisors start putting in their own objections and add backs. And what has happened up until recently, COVID has made it less obvious and less, shall we say, out in the open. But there's something called an add back process where the supervisors will add back in their favorite constituent things. And then what usually happens is that right on the second floor in another room, the nonprofits and the unions have rented a space, and they'll cater lunch and everything else, and have people lobby the supervisors on site, and extend the negotiations into the wee hours of the evening, and get back at least some of what was taken away, presumably by the mayor's office. Is there a mechanism like that with the BART board budget process? Or
no, that doesn't happen at all. The budget is wholly developed by BART staff, who, in conjunction with the labor unions, and it's rolled out in February to the board, and very little changes, and it's rolled out in big numbers. There's no detail to these budgets. And very little changes. Directors try behind the scenes to ask, their particularly favorite questions about whatever it is that they want to get accomplished. All of that's done behind the scenes. The staff keeps rolling out big number budgets until they get to the resolution. The resolution has, a little more detail, but still big numbers. And you don't even get the by department numbers until after the budget's been passed, which I always thought was just crazy. I'd always ask them, can I see the by department budget numbers? And they would say, oh, well, director, we give you that after we pass the budget. So yeah, it's a very, it's not that detailed. There's no lobbying. The lobbying is done
But they don't need it. It's already sort of baked in.
Yeah, the lobbying is done to the staff itself. That's why I said this board is really irrelevant in all of this. Yeah, so just a couple of other things, solutions to fixing all of this. The IG's office needs to be moved outside of the BART agency. I would advocate for MTC actually bringing the IG office under its house and using it as an IG office for all transit agencies in the Bay Area.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It's not effective. The first IG was effective because she was just a really effective person and good at what she did. The IG they've hired now is younger, and she's very interested in keeping her job. I'll leave it at that. Right. And then they should be canceling all non-critical capital projects. Link 21 was a farce from the beginning. They've blown $130 million on a second bay crossing that now it turns out after $130 million, they've decided that it's going to be standard gauge rail and it won't benefit BART at all. But they spent $130 million of Measure RR dedicated BART money on that project.
Yeah, that was like we started. We didn't hear about it until we see it in the newspapers, and it looks like they're going to put it in this loop around the bay almost, and then it turns out that BART's not going to be able to use it.
They can't afford it. So the final point that I have for solving this mess is somebody's got to go line by line through the entire budget. That goes back to the turnaround team, but they've got to cut the administrative costs. And here's a couple of quick facts for you, and then I'll take questions. From fiscal year 19 pre-COVID, in fiscal year 19 pre-COVID, 20% of the budget was administrative costs. Okay, that's overhead. All right. In fiscal year 24, I'm giving you actual numbers, not budgeted. In fiscal year 24, it was 25% of the total budget. So it went up 25% pre-COVID to last year. The administrative costs have gone up 25%.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and the G&A, the general administrative costs in fiscal year 24 were 63% higher than fiscal year 2019. And then I have all kinds of other, numbers and stuff about the operating cost spending going up 34%. And, but here's the bottom line to all of that. BART made a conscious decision. I wrote a piece about this too. BART made a conscious decision early on that they were going to go after a tax measure. They've been talking about it for years. And they made an early conscious decision in 23 and 24 to bump up the service. They're running far more revenue miles and revenue hours now than they did before COVID. And they made a conscious decision to expand the service and expand the spending with the knowledge that they thought they were going to have a tax measure in 24, but now it's 26. And with the knowledge that the more you expand it, the more you have to lose, and you have a better story.
Amazing.
It completely irresponsible on the part of this agency, in my opinion. And so, my take right now is the current bill, I just checked it again this morning. There is no accountability in this bill that is working its way through the legislature to put the tax on the ballot.
I'm assuming this is something Scott Wiener is a big supporter of, right?
He wrote it.
Of course he did.
Yeah, he and Aragon are the authors of SB 63, and it will, I don't know where it's at in passing the Senate, but it's going to pass. I mean, the legislators are going to go, we don't care if the Bay Area wants to put a tax on their ballot.
Yeah.
But there is no accountability provisions of any significance. There's a lot of words in there about accountability, and it comes down to somebody's going to, MTC is going to hire their own auditors to do a assessment of the cost efficiency of BART, and then there's no hook to anybody doing anything after that report gets done.
And I think the main thing here, this is probably going to end up losing. simply because
it's not polling well. Yeah.
Yeah, and the current political environment, we can't get transit bonds passed in San Francisco right now. That's how bad it is.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say that, when I do endorsements and have for years at the Marina Times, I always recommend an absolute no on any new taxes. If California and San Francisco in particular can't deal with $15 billion and come out ahead, I mean, it's outrageous. San Francisco in particular, but California also. It just, I grew up here, and I just don't remember it being this big of a mess. I mean, I know for a fact it wasn't. And how we got here is, a story for the ages. But I always just say, if it says a new tax, say no.
Yeah.
Deal with what you have. And if you can't make it work, you're not too big to fail.
Look, I went into this the last several months with an open mind, knowing how bad the fiscal budget is at BART, and knowing that some form of some assistance to the operating budget from taxpayers, additional assistance, wasn't really off the table for me. But now I see the bill. I had said to stakeholders all along, I want to see what accountability provisions get put into the bill. And I'm telling you, there is nothing with any teeth to it. So from my perspective, if the taxpayers are not going to get assurances that things are going to change and change significantly, it's more status quo, it looks like, unfortunately. And if nothing's going to change, then I would hope that, I will take a position against the tax measure. I haven't officially rolled out a position because I'm waiting to see what the final bill and the final measure looks like.
Yeah, for sure. It's, again, look at what they blew through already for, right. and you expect, they're going to suddenly become accountable?
Yeah, they're not.
So first, before we take some questions, I just wanted to see if I could put you on the spot to write something for us for the Voice of San Francisco.
Sure. I can talk to you offline about some different topics. I have some things drafted, and I'm looking for places.
Great. Yeah.
Perfect.
And now let's take some questions because some people are really anxious here.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
So let's go with AV writer Joe in the beginning.
My favorite guy, AV Joe.
Joe, are you on board?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I got a few questions for Debora. I've been a board follower for some time, even before the pandemic. And I really appreciate Debora's public service. And as a transit fan, having someone stand up and get those fare gates in, they really should be named the Debora Allen fare gates because she was the loudest voice for them. And at least the Tross was a close second, by the way, but in my humble opinion. But let me get to my question, which is, shouldn't part of this bill be requiring BART to at least study automating operating the train so they can have more staff for security? That's just a thought.
Okay. First of all, I'll always appreciate you, Joe. You have been a dedicated follower and contributor to the BART narrative over the years. So first of all, on the fare gates, I appreciate your kind words. I was a very early champion of that. The San Francisco Chronicle even put it in a quote one day that I was a champion of fare gates. Unfortunately, in my own county in Contra Costa, they had a big ribbon cutting celebration at the Pleasant Hill station just 2 days ago, and I was not even invited to the celebration. Oh. So I whatever. I get that they're angry that I'm still out telling it like it is, and I think you opened, Mike, with a comment about me being a bit controversial. Look, I'm controversial for telling the truth. That's it.
Welcome to the club.
Right. And so, I've told it like it is all these years. in one point, I think the Times called me the lightning rod of the BART board, or no, maybe it was the Chronicle. But we need more lightning rods. We've got to start exposing what goes on in these government agencies, because that's the way things get solved.
That's right.
And I'm going to quickly tell you the Fairgate story. I came in to BART after you have to run an election, right? So during my campaign period, I was out at BART stations talking to writers, saying, what do you think BART should change? And overwhelmingly, people said, the fare evasion, it's where all the trouble comes in the system, and why can't they just replace these fare gates? They're garbage, right? It wasn't like some genius thing of mine. I just went and listened to people. And so I brought that in the door at BART, and in the first year, I didn't get much traction. I said it multiple times. In the second year, the media, who I actually named the media the 10th board member at BART, because it was the way I, as a minority opinion board member, could get traction on things like replacing fare gates. And I actually did a number of media interviews in 2018 and early 2019 on replacing the fare gates. The media would go out there with cameras and just sit there and watch people jump the gates over and over and over. And then they'd pan to me and I would comment on it. This is how we got traction on the fare gates. That, and then a couple of very sad, unfortunate things happened in BART at the hands of serial fare evaders. The most significant event being the murder of Nia Wilson.
Yeah.
And so I think that finally moved the board to say, okay, yeah, I guess. And then staff, of course, said, yeah, we got to replace these fare gates. So that's kind of how that came about. And then on automating trains, Joe, I get this a lot, and I'll just tell you a quick story. First of all, it's never going to happen, okay? It's happening in other agencies are pushing this, and I read a recent story, I want to say New York or Boston on the East Coast. They are pushing to automate their trains. Here's a quick story. In 2018, I went to an APTA, American Public Transit Association, I think, conference in Atlanta. And the opening of the conference was a big dinner/cocktail party in a big room of 1,000 people. And I walked in not really knowing anyone, and I grabbed some food and a glass of wine, and I sat down at a table next to a gentleman who I didn't know. And it turns out he was the vice president of one of the consultants who was working on the design of BART's new computer-based train control system. And we got to talking, and I said, well, I got a couple of questions for you. I go, will the new train control system and the new trains allow us, and actually I said, will the new train control system allow us to have automated trains, so, without train operators? And he laughed. And I said, well, you're laughing. Why are you laughing? He goes, the short answer is no. And he goes, you know why? And I said, unions. And he goes, yes, that's exactly right. So they don't want to lose the train operator position in the labor unions. Okay. And this is again why BART doesn't move forward. And so then my second question for him was, well, on a scale of 1 to 10 of this new computer-based train control, how cutting edge is it? And he goes, well, today or when it's finished? And I said, okay, well, today. And he goes, oh, it's probably about a 6 or a 7. And they're designing it, right? Okay, it still hasn't been installed. And by the way, the date is now 2030 plus. And I said, okay, well, what about when it's installed? He goes, yeah, it'll probably be like a 4.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's the answer on train control. I don't think anytime soon. The current design is, the trains were ordered and purchased, $1 billion of trains purchased with the need for an operator in the front of that cab. Now, I always have to qualify this comment by saying that I'm not advocating for there not to be BART personnel on that train. I believe that we could replace that operator position with a personnel on the train that is able to walk the full length of all the cars and keep an eye on what's going on and report back quickly and be trained in emergency protocol for the train.
Yeah, I appreciate that on Caltrain.
Yeah.
Caltrain is I love Caltrain.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a long answer.
So is Vince there?
Yeah, let's get Vince on board. Vince, are you there? Let's see. Vince, can we hear you? Vince may have lost patience with us.
No, he's there.
Oh, there you go. You guys hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, it starts with the mic off, and I had my phone charging because I was listening. I'm here with my daughter. I noticed something kind of like everyone's kind of like talking around, and no one wants to like talk about, or maybe no one's aware of. Kind of started out this thing with the whole with the amount of police officers being able to be allowed on BART. And one of the reasons, and if not the reason why that is the Oscar Grant situation. And everyone knows what happened. They even made a movie about it. And anytime a politician's in power, even everyone's hero, Lauren, is it Lauren Taylor? Every single person mentions Oscar Grant, Oscar Grant, Oscar Grant. And what that does, and you guys all know this, what this does is it constantly puts everyone in a position of guilt. So it's like, hey, if we have more police on BART, they're going to be somehow attacking certain people. But what I never hear talked about, and again, I actually don't want to make this about race. I'm not interested in race. What I want to do is, if only one side of a conversation is ever being talked about, then that entire conversation kind of takes over, as everyone knows. 3 months after Oscar Grant was, sadly killed in the BART area, 4 white officers were killed in Oakland, and you'll never hear anyone talk about this. And it was killed by a black man. And again, I'm not trying to make this about race, but when you make movies, called Fruitvale Station that are promoted, everywhere by left-wing academics, and that are talked about repeatedly, where a officer accidentally shot a black man, which is very unfortunate. No one wants that to happen. It just exacerbates everything. And then conversely, you have 4 white officers killed in Oakland 3 months later, and that is never talked about. And even like me even saying that right now, I feel like a crazy person. Like, you can see me in this position. I look like a psychopath talking about this. I don't want to talk about this. But you have everyone here wants to increase security on BART. And anytime that's brought up, they all bring up Oscar Grant. They go, what about Oscar Grant? What about Oscar Grant? So for the next 20, 50, 100 years, they're going to say, what about Oscar Grant? Or the next version of Oscar Grant that happens in the interim. And it's just going to get worse. And as we know, BART is, as you could say, it's pretty much insolvent. But I kind of wanted to bring that up as one point, but to kind of bring that home, here I wrote down one other point. It seems like unions, I'm not trying to be Mr. Anti-Union, I'm not trying to tie this all into one thing. It seems like unions in the state have no concern when businesses go out of business. And I've kind of noticed this trend. And like one example is like the company Yellow, that trucking company that's been around for, I think, like 70 years. The unions protested, and eventually just went out of business. And I get the feeling, kind of like what you're saying, Deborah, with all your stuff, is it comes to the point, like you just said, BART is almost insolvent. What's the point of just protesting every day when no one has a job? I mean, there has to be a balance. And I feel like that balancing side of the union that was present, 20 years ago, where like it was balancing, fair wages along with like owner operators. It's just completely taken over by people that are unaware that like, hey, you're going to be out of a job as a union if there's no jobs to protect. So there's those two competing things. And then I don't mean to just throw a million things at the wall. I'll just finally say this. I was in the military in 2000 in San Diego, and there was a bridge called the Coronado San Diego Bridge. And I tell everyone this story. This bridge is longer than the Golden Gate Bridge. Mm-hmm. That bridge cost $1 to pay for every single time you crossed it. I fast forward 2009, I went to UC San Diego, and I go back to that bridge, and I notice there's no toll. There's no toll. And I go and I ask the locals in town, I go, hey, what happened to the toll? And this local guy, he's walking his dog. He goes, hey, we paid off the bridge. And my mind was blown, as a Californian. I was like, oh my God, that's a thing? Like, you guys pay things off? Yeah, exactly. That was my reaction too. So the only reason why I bring that story up, that story doesn't really have a point. It doesn't really have a question. The point of that story is like, I want to we're so effing beaten down by the state by just such nuttiness. We forgot saying things like things get paid off, things work, and I want to remind everyone of that, sanity, like Deborah, when sane people are in charge, shit can actually get done. And I just think we're just so beaten down. We're like a fish in water. We have no idea we're in water. So anyways, that was kind of a ranting thing. And
excellent point, Vince. I like that. I'm going to look up that bridge.
Please do.
That's so cool.
Well, thank you, Vince. All good points. First, I'll start with Oscar Grant. The death of Oscar Grant was a very unfortunate incident. You mentioned in your comments the term accidentally killed. I think what many people don't realize is the difference of opinion in whether that was an accident or not. I listened to my board colleague Latifah Simon go out multiple times and say that Oscar Grant was murdered.
Oh, she still says it.
Yes, and
she's on the. But I just wanted to mention, by the way, Latifah Simon is on the board of Tipping Point, the mayor of San Francisco's nonprofit.
Yeah, so difference of viewpoint there. Most in the policing academic world who looked at all of the evidence in the case believe, and the testimony and the trials and all of that, believe that it was a policing accident. So I found myself in opposition to those folks in 2020 when there was a large movement among followers of some of these board directors I sat with. They were called to come to a budget meeting when we were considering the fiscal year 21 budget in June of 2020, heart of COVID. And we listened to, an hour or more of 3 minutes at a time of activists saying, defund the police. And, board directors not saying a word to that. And so, except for me, I chose to actually respond and found myself the topic of a lot of news stories by responding with, rejecting comments that were said, comments like, quote, police officers don't murder people, which is the narrative that was being put at us as a board, one right after another. And so I responded and pushed back on that narrative and found myself in a lot of news stories and my board colleagues calling me a racist. And the whole thing sort of blew up. That was the point, by the way, when I decided to run for re-election. I think I said earlier in this recording that I was not going to run for re-election.
Right.
And the reason I ran for re-election at that point was I couldn't let them get away with pushing down people like myself who were just there to try to bring a truthful narrative. So I had the Oscar Grant family do a press conference the following Monday, and they called for my resignation, and nothing ever came of it. And I ran for re-election. I was elected by 64% of the vote.
Wow. Do you mind if I interrupt there just one little thing? Because that's first of all, that's amazing. But the only reason I want to interrupt there is I'm shocked that you were able to get anything in like that, because I live in the Sacramento area, so we have the mirror thing here. We have the Stephon Clark shooting. And in the entire Sacramento area, I have never met, and this is a pathetic thing that I do occasionally, I ask people, like, if I'm out and about, I say, who killed Stephon Clark? Everyone says a white police officer. It was a black police officer. Mm-hmm. The entire apparatus of Sacramento screams and yells racist. Where I lived in Midtown, and they marched. They didn't do any damage, thankfully. This is kind of before the really bad BLM riots, but this is kind of the ramping up to it. This is like 1 or 2 years before that, but it definitely stoked the fires. And the only reason why I'm kind of interrupting here is there is no way to approach that conversation without sounding like a psychopath. So if I've gone to the city council meetings many times, and there is activist after activist screaming up there, and I am not making this up. I wish I would have filmed it. There is a guy that comes up every single year, and his sister was murdered. His sister, if you guys look up the story, his name is Dan Tibbetts. His sister lived in Land Park, if you guys know where that is, a really nice part. This guy came in, he broke into her house, killed her, raped her, and killed her dog, and then burnt down the house. And he goes up every single year and he gives this testimony. And the reason why I'm interested in this testimony is he says, I don't want to get mistaken here, but I believe it's Prop 56. He says, because of Prop 56, and that's where we let criminals out, it was like 2 years earlier than their sentence. He's like, this gentleman got out. I hate to use the word gentleman, got out and then killed my sister. And he's like, hey, for making these laws like that kill people, we need to address this. And the people in the crowd start snickering. All these activists start snickering. And this sounds kind of pathetic, but I start tearing up every time he tells this story, because I'm like, Jesus Christ, man, it's your sister's dying. And then just to watch the inhumanity of that, and to know, Deborah, that you're able to, I don't know how according to, kind of like the appearance of Oakland and SF, it sounds like you guys are even fighting a bigger uphill battle. But to know that you've fought against that, it's unwinnable in Sacramento, because
yeah. Well, look, I didn't fight against it. All I did was wanted to say my viewpoint, right? And this is where on the BART board of directors, people say, oh, it's so, I was such a catalyst for, the infighting. And some have said now, oh, it's so great Deborah's not here because she doesn't, interject anything different than what everyone else is saying. That's what it's really about. It's about countering, the other side of a narrative. And there were a lot of really bad narratives at the BART board, and there still are. I'm still watching select parts of select meetings. And my poor colleague, Elizabeth Ames, if any of you can support her, I appreciate it. She's like the lone soldier left.
And what is her name?
Elizabeth Ames. She represents the Fremont area. She's the only one left that's asking any questions about the budget. And, a really great question came up just last week on that, where she asked, where are the org charts? And the Inspector General had done an investigation and a report on the fact that that BART needed to do what's called a span of control study to fully understand all the levels of their management and their workers in every department, and do a fully built out org chart for every single area of BART. So the report was put out. Management agreed in a meeting, we'll get on that. And they haven't done anything since. And so Liz brings this up at the meeting last week, and oh my God, you'd have thought that all of their dogs were shot. They couldn't believe that she would bring up something that was, and this is how they treat people. I think of all of Latifah Simon was particularly bullyish, along with Janice Lee, with respect to cutting off the narrative. Every time I began to talk about budgets or spending or anything, I was, they made every attempt at every meeting in the last year to try to cut off my narrative, Liz's narrative, whenever we tried to criticize the agency. So, you know, the fighting back part, I didn't really view it as fighting back. I was just fighting to express my, you know, my right to free speech, right, and give my opinion. It was very difficult at times, and it took a lot more energy for me to push back on some of these narratives than it would have to just vote yes. So
I mean, someone's got to, you know, be the voice of reason, and or if nothing else, be the voice that's contrarian. I mean, it's like the press in San Francisco. You know, it's just one note Johnny. And when I first started to write things in the Marina Times 20 years ago about the problems with drugs and homelessness, you know, people wrote me and said, well, we don't have that in the Marina, and we don't see that in the Chronicle. And well, guess what? You know, that's because you don't have any other point of view, but they do now.
Yeah, well, they tried very hard to cancel me. They tried in 2020 when I ran for re-election. Bevan Dufty personally wrote a $20,000 check to my opponent.
Oh my gosh, what?
Yes. And then, you know, actually Rebecca Saltzman and I don't know, maybe some others had to do with this, but I know she was key in recruiting my opponent to run against me. And people actually sent me text messages that Bevan was sending out to people 2 weeks before the filing deadline, saying that they needed to find somebody to run against this racist Debora Allen, and that they had to get somebody to stand up and run against me. And Rebecca actually recruited the person who did. And then they, you know, they're fundraising. I've got videos and audios of fundraising calls they did where, you know, with the Oscar Grant family and others calling me racist and, you know, all of that stuff. They made it very difficult. And, you know, for me, though, you know, all of that made me fight harder. Right?
Yeah.
If they had just left things alone, if they had just left me alone, I would have not run for re-election and I would have been gone in 2020. But they made it worse for themselves by attempting to cancel me. And I was not going to let that happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, believe me, I get it.
Okay.
So, a couple of other things that Vince said, the bridge tolls. You do realize the bridge tolls in the Bay Area now fund BART, right?
Oh,
they're funding. Oh yeah, region number 3 had several $100 million going to the extension to Silicon Valley.
Oh God! Wow.
It's amazing.
Guess we aren't going to pay off our bridges anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, we could get into this whole conversation. There's a narrative out there among the activists that it's not fair that BART has to rely on so much ridership revenue to fund BART, and they compare it to highways. But it's unfortunate that people only look at that operating budget and they don't look at the operating budget plus the huge amount of infrastructure costs that it costs to run BART. $1.5 billion a year.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the riders, then you can't justify the costs. I mean, that's how I look at it. If you don't have the riders, you can't justify this 77% of the budget that goes to the union contract. I mean, something's got to give. And when is that? I mean, it's just like, and you know, don't get me wrong. There's people in unions that work very hard, that I know very well, that I respect. We don't always agree, but we can go out and have dinner or lunch and talk about things going on in the city, agree on some things, disagree on others. Some of them were my best sources on the Harlan Kelly and Nuru stories that ended up, you know, helping get 2, you know, big officials put in prison. But also, you know, they're there for their union, and that's, you know, they've worked hard to get where they are. And I get that, but you cannot, you know, put your head in the sand when BART is about to go bankrupt and you're trying to keep your pennies and dimes and millions. It's just not going to work.
That's right. You know, the total. So I have some little data points that are based on statistical data that BART puts in its annual ACFR its financial report, that in fiscal year 24, the total deficit per passenger mile was 91 cents. So for every mile that a passenger travels, one passenger travels, 91 cents is deficit. Deficit is generated.
Wow.
And then you can take that to, I've got some others on train revenue hours, $2,000 per train revenue hour of deficit. And this is the difference between the fare revenue, passenger revenue minus the operating expenses. So they're generating $2,000 per train revenue hour, $65 per train revenue mile. Wow. And those numbers are like 200 to 300% higher in fiscal year 24 than they were in fiscal year 19.
Wow. I just don't even know what to say. I don't have a lot of hope for the future of BART at this point. But is it too big to fail? What can happen?
I think it's got to fail on the tax measure. And then people will have to come in and treat it like a bankruptcy, restructure all those things I listed, and then figure out how to run transit for the future. I don't want to see BART shut down. It's critical to the Bay Area, but it's gotten to a place where it is not sustainable. Even if they get their 0.5 sales tax for the next 10 years, it isn't going to be enough, because right after that is a $3.5 billion unfunded critical infrastructure need that they will have to do another tax measure for.
And
do you mind if I tell you how quick this can get off the rails too? I don't mean to hijack, just real quick. In Sacramento, they put up a measure, and this is going to be voted on, and I'll post it in the chat here. They're going to charge residents for parking out front of their own homes. Tax. So I'm just kind of letting everyone know how quickly this can just get. Yeah, it's going to metastasize. I'm holding my daughter right now, but I'm going to try to post it in the chat right now.
Actually, it's funny that he mentions that Vince mentions that, because I have heard there's some rumbling that they want to do the same in San Francisco.
Really?
Yeah, I've heard talk about possible putting parking meters in residential areas.
Interesting.
I don't know. These are just from inside City Hall sources, but I don't know how serious the talk is, but let's just say it's come up at Muni in conversations amongst people. Maybe not officially come up, but that's one of the things people have meant. I think it's even in a presentation that I saw, the possibility of expanding paid parking into residential areas.
Oh my God. Will it never end?
And I think the response to that, it wasn't a presentation, because the response was somebody said, well, then, all the rich people with garages will get out of paying. And again, it's all on the poor people. So it's the most ridiculous thing. It's just, can we hate cars anymore? It's just, like the guys on the Great Highway, right? How long have I said, I had to take my father to the Veterans Hospital, San Francisco Veterans Hospital, twice a week. And we lived on Buena Vista and Buena Vista Avenue East in the far west part of the city. And then we had to go, and we took the Great Highway, not only because it was the best way to get there, but also because my father, who had dementia and had been in the Navy and had moved to San Francisco in the early 50s, had great memories of Playland by the beach, and he loved driving, and it calmed him down. We'd stop for lunch at the Cliff House or Louis, and that was a big part for him. And, these people that are fighting for closing things and shutting down cars, they've clearly never taken care of an elderly, ill parent. But they will someday. And by then, all the streets will be closed. There'll be no cars. They'll have to do it on a bike. Good luck.
It's amazing. Yeah, I'm sure we could go on about the role of advocacy groups in changing the policies of transit agencies, especially once they become part of the service infrastructure, which frankly shouldn't be happening.
Yep.
Yeah, there's one topic that we didn't really touch on, and I'll just quickly mention, and that's the transit-oriented development. That's developing the parking lots of BART into housing. This is just more mission drift, in my opinion. The actual revenue that's coming from the projects that have been completed to date is really minuscule with respect to the deficits that are being run. And BART's never going to be able to use that model they use, which is 99-year leases of land to developers. That model is never going to produce the revenue that BART is looking for. It's really just a gift to housing.
Yeah, it's not going to produce any revenue. Housing doesn't produce revenue in the Bay Area.
Well, especially low-income housing.
No.
It costs more to build and produces.
That's the main issue, is the mandatory inclusion of affordable housing in these schemes.
Yeah, the subsidized housing is, no, it just can't work. I mean, my dad back in the day, houses were going for somewhere around $20,000 to $50,000. We're never going to get back there. So it's pretty dire, but I'm not convinced that, affordable housing is going to solve that.
So any other points or questions?
Well, I think I've probably given you more than enough.
We really appreciate it, Deborah. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Coming on to 2 hours.
Sure. I appreciate you inviting me to talk here.
And give us something, let's talk offline. Our editor-in-chief, who's our host today on the Voice channel, Mike Iggy, can talk to you about ideas for, whatever you want to get out there, because I think it's really important. BART's very important to commuters, and they need to know what's going on, especially fiscally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just real quick, it's worth mentioning that I'm working with a new group called SHIFT, Sustainable Housing, Infrastructure, Finance, and Transportation. It's a group of, kind of policy wonky people that are really a lot smarter than me, that study all of the data and statistics on all of those topics. And so I'm hoping that you'll hear more about SHIFT going forward as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And before we go, actually, we do have Griffin Lee is here, and he wants to say something, Mike, about an initiative.
Let me see if I can get him on. Okay, Griffin, you should have that invitation to speak.
Yeah, we really do have to get on another platform.
I'm gonna send another.
The Spaces thing is, it's great because it's of the moment and it's right there, and but it's really not very user friendly. Elon.
Yeah, basically it's a conference call, and so you just don't. You'll get lots of bandwidth, especially bandwidth related errors and cutoffs and things like that. Let me make sure that Griffin has his. I'll invite Griffin one more time. See if he can get on. But those of you who are interested in listening to some of our past Sunday brunch spaces that have aged out on Twitter, we've saved some of them and have uploaded them to a YouTube channel, which is available at youtube.com/@thevosf. We've got about 5 of them up right now, including the most recent one where we interviewed the Dutch anthropologist and photographer Tuan Voeten about his coverage of the fentanyl crisis on American coasts, as well as the methamphetamine crisis globally. Before that, we have our 2 conversations with Supervisor Matt Dorsey, about the Recovery First bill and some of our reactions to it, and a couple of others. and we keep archiving more as we have time.
I actually think I found them.
Griffin, is that you?
Griffin?
Yep, that's me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Regarding all these streets and anti-car rhetoric, I just wanted to give heads up that there are two major projects that the SFCTA is running right now for future planning to how our streets can drastically be changed. One of them is the Inner Sunset Study that is, I believe, just completed round one of outreach.
Oh, no. That's where I live. No.
Susan, I knew this would perk your ears. I know this would perk a lot of ears on the west side, given how much abuse they've received the last 6 months due to the Great Highway closure. I would encourage, shameless plug, but I would encourage anyone to show up to our Connected SF's June 18th coffee chat with Amy Thompson, who is a transportation planner at SFCTA, who has not only overseen the Inner Sunset West Side Study, which, long story short, could close traffic lanes, could mean implementation of more bike lanes, could mean more build-outs, meaning like quick builds on the west side. But she's also going to be chatting about Transportation 50 Plus, which is, oh God, I don't know where to start, but it's a big initiative to really potentially have drastic changes to our streets.
What does 50 plus stand for?
It's 2050 plus, so it's like the next 25 years of transportation infrastructure planning. I don't know too much about the project. That's why we were having her come and talk to us about it. I met Amy Thompson when I attended a Vision Zero freeway ramps open house about a month ago in the Bayview. Vision Zero freeway ramps is another initiative where they are currently in design and conceptual development phases. The Vision Zero ramps freeway study or project has the potential to change a lot of the on and off ramp infrastructure on like a dozen or so on and off ramps throughout San Francisco.
So that bicyclists can get on them? I don't understand what the connection to bicyclists is.
Well, there's various. I mean, I went to one of these open houses again, as I said, a month ago, and there were offers, or there were ideas such as new street repaving, new traffic signals, yes, bike infrastructure, pedestrian, crosswalk safety initiatives. It's a mixture of like street infrastructure, meaning like pedestrian street safety initiatives, bike infrastructure.
Who's paying for this?
So the design and sort of outreach phases, or I should say leading up to this point, SFCTA has received a federal grant. The next, once it gets to, I should say, the actual implementation is, there's nothing set in stone because they'll have to apply for another grant for the implementation. So right now, as I mentioned, it's like outreach and design leading up to January 26th.
Can you put that the information about the coffee in the comments there so that we can post it?
Yes, I will dig up my million tabs and try and find the Zoom link for it and put that in the comments.
Okay, great.
Yeah, please do. Go ahead and send that to me as well, if you would.
Yes, and the Inner Sunset Study. Again, they've just completed phase one of outreach, but Phase 2 of outreach will begin at some point at the end of summer. But yeah, I will happy to put the links.
Yeah, can you please do that?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, and we are coming on to 1 p.m. And I suspect people want to get back to their weekend.
Time for me to go take some NyQuil.
Yeah, and yeah. Please, Susan, go back to
Yeah, well, Susan.
Yeah, I know. It's like, oh my gosh.
In addition to being our fearless leader, Susan has been working very hard to promote the voice and also to raise funds for it, which we're starting to get very successful in that regard, that we can always use more. She's been basically working herself to the point where she got herself a case of pneumonia. So I'm saying, go back to bed.
Yeah, well, actually, it's funny you say that because my doctor literally ordered me to bed rest, and I have a recheck with her on Tuesday to find out, what the next phase is. But I'm having a feeling it may not be like, oh, get right back into it, because she already told me that I was overworked.
Right.
So, I mean, a lot of what I do is very behind the scenes, but the reason I've not been able to write for the last week or so is because fundraising at a fevered pitch and sickness. But the thing I wanted to mention to people is that we are a 501c3, so a California tax-exempt nonprofit, so anything you donate is tax deductible. If you go to thevoicesf.org and you hit the subscribe button, you'll be given an option to subscribe to our newsletter, either for free, which Mike writes and puts out every Thursday, and it's fascinating because he has such a breadth of knowledge and such a long history and experience at City Hall, so it's always full of great tidbits, and you'll get that in your inbox. And if you want to donate even $5, $10 a month, our goal is to get 2,000 people donating $10 a month by the end of the year. And if we can do that, that would sustain us. And anything above that would help us grow. So consider a $5 a month or $10 a month subscription if you like what we're doing. Independent journalism, we just broke the story about the San Francisco Unified School District that was, went viral and went national about their equity grading, and we'll be having John Tresvigna on in the near future to discuss that and other topics like, what's going on with the ethnic studies and all that. But we have some great writers. We're small but mighty. We work really hard. We're basically, I look at us as, a startup. I mean, I've worked at startups. I worked at Apple when Apple was practically a startup. I'm dating myself here, but I was in high school and college. But I watched how hard they worked, and now I look at where people are, and it's because of the hard work they put in. The Standard got what I've recently heard a total of $40 million given to them by Michael Moritz. But you know what? You can't buy experience and talent. You either have it or you don't. And experience is something I think people discount in journalism. The sources you build, the knowledge you build, that can't be replaced. And we have people like Mike and myself and John Rothman on our daily podcast, which I highly subscribe. It's 5 minutes. It'll be so worth it. But it's really important to support independent media because I'm telling you, without the Voice of San Francisco, you're going to get a broken record from pretty much most of the rest of the media. So,
indeed. Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much all for your support and your good work, and have a great rest of your Sunday.
Yes, indeed.
And thank you, Director Allen, for spending so much of your time with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. Have a great Sunday.